Traffic snarled in Europe, all because of a car service here in the U.S. We'll explain why and what it might mean for Uber's prospects as a public company. In capital cities all across Europe, horns were blaring, people were protesting, and traffic slowed to a crawl, all to show their disdain for a car-sharing service. From London to Berlin, taxi drivers are venting their anger against Uber. The privately held startup, which has recently been valued around $18 billion, allows users to book a taxi using a smartphone. And as this new up-and-comer tries to change the way the industry works, it's not going over well with taxi and limousine drivers. Stefan Pedrazi has the story from Paris.
It's the second time this year that taxi drivers are blocking the streets of Paris in order to protest against the competition from private companies like Uber. They believe it's an unfair competition as they are not facing the same rules. Taxi drivers, for instance, must pay a license of $300,000, while private companies only pay a small registration fee every year. The French government promised to regulate the sector, but it's not really planning to address the core problem, which is the lack of taxis in the French capital. Over here, it's not unusual on weekends to wait for up to 1 hour in order to get a taxi. But still, a majority of French people believe that the taxi drivers are right to take it to the streets. According to a recent survey, 56% of them think that the taxi drivers are right to go on strike. Not surprising after all in a country where competition is not a key word and where strike is almost a national sport. In Paris, for Nightly Business Report, I'm Stefan Pedrazi.
Surprisingly, all those protests against Uber have actually been good for business. The company said it saw an 850% jump in app downloads compared to last Wednesday.
So how will all of this hoopla play out for Uber, both financially and legally? Let's get some perspectives from our experts. Roger McNamee is co-founder of Elevation Partners, and John Singer is a partner at the New York law firm of Singer Deutsch. Welcome, gentlemen, both of you. Mr. Singer, let me begin with you. As I understand it, and I have some sympathy with the taxi and limousine drivers who are subject in many cities around the world, and certainly in this country, to regulations and requirements, that they would object to this upstart, a disruptor coming in. And Uber's answer, I am told in part, is that we're not really legally a car service. We're a matchmaker putting together people who want a car and somebody who has a car. Is that a legal fiction, a fig leaf, or what?
Well, that's been their defense so far. They've claimed that they're just a facilitator, a matchmaker, an arranger. They're not a private car company. They're not a private transportation service. But if you look across the country, a lot of states and a lot of municipalities have opined upon whether or not Uber is legal or illegal. New York, Massachusetts, California, initially they had issued cease and desist letters to the company and tried to preclude them from operating. And then all of a sudden, after public outcry was such, they reversed course. Then again, you have municipalities like Austin and Miami who have said, you know what? This is illegal, and this violates a variety of different regulations, both at the state and the city level. So, you know, it's interesting. There's no unanimity yet, but the public outcry is so extremely in favor of Uber that I think that eventually there's going to be unanimity and Uber is going to be allowed to enter all jurisdictions.
Mm-hmm. Roger, let me ask you, as an entrepreneur, as a venture capitalist who has invested in so many Silicon Valley companies, you know, what's wrong with being a free market disruptor here? And what comes to mind for me is FedEx taking on the post office, Napster taking on the music industry. In the end, is Uber going to prevail?
I think so, and I think for precisely the reasons that the other guest was just speaking about, that the service really works. And in many cases, at least in the United States, they really are serving as a matchmaker for existing limousine drivers and existing taxi drivers. It's doing a much better job of helping them find fares quickly than they were able to do under the old systems. I think the real challenge for investors in looking at Uber is, what is it worth? We've obviously got a stake in the ground placed by Fidelity and others at $18 billion, which is a breathtaking number no matter how you cut it.
What do you think? Is it worth
I
it?
believe that Well, I don't think the number will work if the company remains a reservation system only. But I think their market opportunity is gigantic in the following context. We have something developing in the United States and I think around the world called the sharing economy, where increasingly consumers are choosing to live in cities, and instead of borrowing a lot of money to buy cars and to buy homes, they're using things on a pay-as-you-go basis, effectively doing what businesses have been doing for 30 years. I think that is a change that is fundamental and is going to last a long time. And Uber is one of the core players there. So to me, if I were the CEO of Uber or its competitor Lyft, I would be taking this capital, the billions of dollars they're able to raise at essentially no cost. And I would go to General Motors or to Mercedes-Benz, and I would do a deal and buy $1 billion worth of cars at a huge discount. And I would become the primary owner of cars. Because in the long run, people aren't going to want to own cars. They're going to take their iPhone up to it and rent it an hour or two at a time.
Right.
And Uber can be that player. And at their cost of capital, they and Lyft have an open opportunity to make that work. And I know that's not, owning capital goods is not a popular thing, but I know Wall Street's going to love it. And I'm with your other guest. I think consumers have already decided that Uber and its competitors are a better idea than what's there now.
They're paying for the convenience of it. John, I don't know whether you were able to see the faint smile that was on Roger's face as he contemplated the possibilities here. My question for you is, if I'm Uber, what is my ultimate legal liability if I am involved in an accident with one of their riders, or something bad happens on a trip here? They're going to say, not me, I just put you two together. That was a private compact contract between you and this guy, I don't know, in Birmingham or Austin or London.
They've already said that. I mean, there's been several wrongful death cases. There was one in California where an Uber driver who was using the app at the time had run over a family and had killed a small child. And of course, there's been a wrongful death suit that was then filed, and Uber said, well, these people, these drivers are not employees of the company. That is true. At the same time, while they may be technically independent contractors, it seems to me to be a very quasi-employee-employer relationship. There's a tremendous proliferation of the service right now. That means there's going to be a tremendous increase in suits against the company because things are going to happen. Accidents occur, criminal activities occur by the drivers, and the company, I think, is not going to be able, at the end of the day, to shirk liability. I think that's going to be not the class actions they're facing about tips, but I think the biggest liability area for them is going to be in the traditional employer-employee relationship, and whether or not they're liable for their drivers' acts.
Right. And Roger, let me ask you that. So you're in favor of this Uber business model, but let's say the company loses some of these lawsuits and has, big legal fees that they have to pay. How much does that risk this business model?
Well, the way I would characterize it, I think Jonathan's absolutely right. They're going to have to accept that liability is part of the business. And frankly, because the convenience is so great, consumers are showing a clear preference to pay a premium to Uber, right? Uber's not a deep discount product. It's a product with premiums associated because the convenience is so high. So there's plenty of money in the system to pay all the costs of those things. I think they simply need to, if you will, man up to it, recognize that it's a cost of doing business. I think the reason I'm excited about it is that 3 years ago when they got started, it wasn't obvious that they could get big enough to overwhelm the civic opposition. They've clearly done that in the United States. They seem to be doing it in Europe. And to my mind, the core thing now is to convert from this very thinly veiled reservation model into recognizing that they're a transportation company and a delivery company, and that's a huge opportunity with big margins that they can exploit.
And just for the record, Roger, you have no stake in that company, correct?
No, none at all. I mean, I wish I had one from about a year or two ago, right? Because I'd be looking pretty good today.
And finally, John, have you ever used it?
I use it all the time. I think it's a fantastic service in New York City, of course, where we live.
Yeah.
There's nothing better. It's quick, it's reliable, and I think it's a great company. I do think there's going to be a myriad of legal issues, though, for the company.
It's got everybody talking. Roger McNamee, thanks very much, John Singer. We appreciate your participation as well.